40-year-old went to a bowling alley in Lewiston and shot and killed 8 people there, drove about 4 miles to a sports bar, shot and killed 10 people there, and then disappeared.
I'm Sarah Ferris, true crime podcast producer.
And I'm Katherine Schweit, former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
And you're listening to Stop the Killing.
Hello, Sarah. Good morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon for me.
Oh, that's right. Sarah, of course, is on the other side of my pond. And we are so honored today to have Robert Conlin with us. Robert is the author of The Lewiston Shooting, an all-American tragedy about a shooting that occurred here in the States in Maine, in a place where, first of all, if you've ever been to Maine, it's a beautiful place in the country. But this was a shooting that occurred that shocked the community and shocked the state. Welcome, Robert. Could you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and how you came to be here?
Yes, I live here in the state of Maine. I live in Wisconsin, a town about an hour from Lewiston on the coast. So I'm a former reporter in the States and in Holland. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, decided I wanted to get back to what I really enjoy doing, which is reporting and writing. And published a book earlier this year with Casemate Publishers about the Afghanistan, the life and death of Abbey Gate, about the fall of Afghanistan. And then this happened, and, this was an unexpected tragedy that took place right in my backyard.
Can you share with us some of the things that you learned for the book that you wrote? I think that would it be fair to say that you felt that your role in part, especially having been a writer for a long time, was to illuminate what people were saying, what the words and the concerns were. I mean, you're not condemning law enforcement, but you're trying to say, here are the issues that were brought up. Is that
Absolutely.
fair?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for putting it that way, because that's exactly how I feel about it. No, by no means am I just finger pointing. But having said that, I really wanted to write the book in a way to bring attention to some details. The report that was issued yesterday certainly does. I think that the title for the report was Opportunities Missed. And there were so many opportunities. We talked about the post after the post news, but so many opportunities to stop him before, so many red flags. The local law enforcement had that chance. Certainly his Army Reserve unit had that chance. They were aware of his behavior for about a year. They were not proactive in the least in terms of trying to get him some help, and seemed to want to wash their hands clean of the whole affair. And so, we're leading right up until that very night. It is sort of an erosion of public trust. Like, you guys had these chances. Please accept some accountability for this and fix it. October 25th of last year, 2023, a 40-year-old native of Maine, career Army Reserve soldier, who was otherwise seemingly decent human being, after about a year-long length of real paranoid behavior that was documented by both the Army and law enforcement. He went to a bowling alley in Lewiston, about 15 miles from where he lived, and he shot and killed 8 people there. And then he got in his car and he drove about 4 miles to a sports bar and shot and killed 10 people there, and then disappeared from sight for the next 46 hours. So a massive manhunt ensued. And overall, the impact of the story was much greater as a result of the manhunt that just shut the state down for that length of time. The year prior, there had been 19 homicides in the whole state. And that one night, there were 18. So that maybe just gives an idea of the impact it would have had on the state. Otherwise, it's a fairly rural state, large area, a lot of land, and few people, which is really nice when you live here. 1.3 million people, and hunting culture for the most part. So a fairly high ratio of firearms owners in the state. But having said that, very few homicides, I think, which puts into perspective the mentality of the gun owners here. And, fairly low crime rate. Lewiston itself, the city, is a pretty gritty city for the state. It's second largest in the state, but only 37,000 people. A fairly rural, peaceful state. Actually, the FBI had come out just, I think, a week before the shootings and called Maine the safest state in the nation. Yeah.
Talk about foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Robert, where were you on this day that this happened?
Well, I was at home, and like everybody else, it just kind of erupted on social media. Just unbelievable sort of, here's a picture of this shooter at the bowling alley. It was released. I wasn't in the lockdown area that was confined to, I think, within 10 miles probably of the shootings. But despite that, people were not going out. It was extremely quiet for a couple of days. People were, ventured out, some, but not much. And it was just a very surreal experience. So the shootings took place at around 7 and 7:15, and then at 10 p.m. they found his car about 10 miles away at a boat launch. And from that point, for the next 46 hours, I think it was in total, the lockdown was in that immediate area, the communities around where they found it, in Lewiston and then around the boat launch.
So to set the table, what we have is a shooting in Lewiston, Maine, that caused the death of 18 people and injuries to others that occurred on a single evening at 2 locations. And then the shooter disappeared. His vehicle was found 10 miles away. And then this manhunt ensued. And so it put the entire community into shock. Not only was this the worst shooting that had ever happened in the state, it just was a shooting that never seemed to end. And I think that's part of the reason why we wanted to tell this story today, is the impact not only of what occurred before, but what occurred after, and how that impacted an entire community and, in fact, an entire state.
Of all the cases that we've done, this is different because obviously a lot of the times the shooting is resolved at the scene. But is that something you've ever seen before?
Almost all the time. It's about 80%, 90% of the time, this situation is resolved at the scene or shortly after, a block or 2 away or something like that. So it's very unusual to have a shooter leave an area. We have a handful of cases that we've seen through the years where you have a very public shooting and the shooter disappears, and maybe we don't find the shooter again, or we find him far away. Robert, businesses weren't even allowed to open. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, virtually all of them were shut down. I know the only real ones that were open were a couple of gun stores. Other than that, they were shut down. It was, you were in your house in that immediate area. And like I said, even in the surrounding region, I'm an hour away, and it was dead quiet. People were indoors. They were paying attention to social media and television and not really venturing forth.
I saw Sarah smirk when you said gun stores.
I know.
Could that be a more American statement? I was thinking you were going to say grocery stores would be open for essentials, or perhaps a pharmacy, but a gun store.
It is pretty ironic, isn't it? And, actually there were reports that, their parking lots were full.
Yeah.
Well, what's safer place in a gun store, right? He also had an extensive military background, and he had trained cadets at West Point, small arms, and they knew he had a thermal scope. So there were a lot of reasons why they thought, this guy could be on the run and gone, and we have no idea where he's going. He was right near a river. He could have gone on a boat. They were examining all those things.
I think you mentioned thermoscope. What he's saying is that you could pick up a scope where you could pick up somebody walking at night because of the heat from their body. Yeah. And so, that's the idea of, if you've killed once, maybe you're going to kill again. And we saw that in the Boston bombing. We had a bombing at the Boston Marathon. We had 2 bombers. They escaped. They were being hunted. They knew they were being hunted. They killed a police officer. They randomly killed this person, that person. We see that when people are on the run, they take a car and they kill a person in the process. So it's understandable.
And they were also thinking about, there was a police ambush here a few years ago in New Hampshire, not the next state over. And I know the police referenced that they were afraid that he was setting up an ambush to go after them. So they didn't take the dogs and go after. Once they found the car, they didn't follow his trail, which has been questioned.
Can you tell us about the first location of the shooting?
Yeah, with the bowling alley. It was called Just in Time Bowling Alley, a multi-lane center. A very tight-knit community there. There were leagues going on at the time. He had bowled there in the past. He was familiar with the location. So that was his first stop that night.
And the photograph that was released that you said you saw on social media, when you first saw it, what did you see?
Well, it showed a completely calm and seemingly unflappable human being with a AR 10 raced to his shoulder in a shooting position, scanning the locale for victims. It was pretty chilling. He actually had a jam in his rifle at that moment. A couple of lifelong friends, 51-year-old gentlemen had known each other all their life, charged him to try to disarm him. It's an incredible act of bravery. And he cleared the jam just in time to shoot them. And then he didn't wander that far through the facility. Shot and killed 8 people. There were children in there, the 14-year-old teenager that was killed, but there were a lot of younger children in there. And he wounded 3 inside that facility, and then he left. It's not, nobody really knows why he decided to leave.
It's not uncommon for shooters to step to the doorway, fire, and then step out. It's a control factor for them, that they're in control of the scene. They choose when to come in, they choose when to leave. So he chose to come into the bowling alley. He shot people. He did some damage. I think they disconnect from that, and then they step back out. I think it's fascinating and will be studied as always, right? That he then hopped in his car and drove to another location. So tell us about the second location.
Yeah, the second location was 4 miles away, and it was also a place that he had been before. There was a lot of cornhole leagues that went on there. That's become very popular. He had played cornhole there in the past, and he had a girlfriend there that he met there. No longer dating, but met there. And he went in there very calmly and coolly, just like he did the other location. He walked a little bit further in this case. He shot and killed 10 people there. They were playing pool or they were playing cornhole. This time, though, he was in there for, I think it was 3 minutes. He reloaded, and as he was reloading, one of the survivors, whose son was out on the floor with him and thankfully also survived, he went into a utility closet, and then he just happened to look up and see the main breaker for the electrical panel for the building, and just randomly saw it and just grabbed it and threw it into darkness, just as the shooter was aiming his weapon at his son. And a number of people said that the fact that it went into darkness, they could tell that he was confused at that point, because he walked out shortly afterwards and certainly saved a lot of lives.
Wow, what a smart move without thought. I'm sure it was almost a thoughtless of, I'm just going to try this because I'm going to try something.
Exactly.
And
that's how he explained it. Was he had no idea it was even there. He just happened to run in and throw his back against the wall and looked, and there was a panel, and he just
popped the lights off. So really just a reaction. How wonderful to just think of somebody who just chose to do that. And so he was able to get into a utility closet, but there really weren't a lot of places for somebody to hide, so to speak, right? Run, hide, fight.
Yeah, no, it was really sad. People were pulling tables over themselves and cornhole boards, and a lot of them were crawling when they were shot. And there was a deaf cornhole league that was there that night. So 10 members were deaf. 4 of them were killed, and another 3 were wounded out of the 10. And that was especially tragic just because obviously they couldn't hear initially. They felt vibrations, but they, it took them a little longer to respond to what was going on.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
So sad. So the subject then takes off. He's unnerved by the darkness of the room, and he takes off, and he climbs back in his car. Then where did he go?
Well, presumably straight to the boat launch where they found his car. They don't actually know they don't have any recordings of him passing by anywhere, and they have no idea where he was from the time he left there. It's easy to speculate that he went to the boat launch, and then I've walked the trail from the boat launch, and there's a bicycle walking path that runs through the trees and along the river, and it's a very easy, simple connection from one to another. And I talked to his best friend who was in the Army with him for 18 years, and who said that he was executing a plan, that he went from the bowling alley to the sports bar, and then he went to shoot his coworkers where he used to work there. He had a lot of animosity with those people. So he was executing a plan, and the only reason he didn't kill more people was that the lockdown prevented them from coming to work.
Wow.
Yeah, so that is speculation, obviously, but that's speculation built on conversations with people who know him the best, and they actually told Maine State Police, he's going here, that's where you'll find him.
just to paint a picture for our audience, the distance from the cars is a very wooded area. He drives to a spot that has access to a river. I don't remember the name of that river. Can you help me?
Yeah, the Androscoggin River.
Yeah, like he said. So he drives to the river to what is a boat launch. So there's a speculation immediately that perhaps he had staged a getaway vehicle, a craft there, so that he could get on a boat. And if he went in one direction, he would go, south in Maine. But if he went north, how far is it to Canada?
It's 200 miles. The source of that river is way up in northern New Hampshire, but he couldn't go south because there's a dam right beneath him. So they knew that. I mean, that's access to the ocean.
Yeah,
which is 20 miles to the open ocean. Upriver, he wouldn't have gone all the way to Canada because that river is dammed. The little paper mills go all the way up that river. So, once you got past the initial, he's at the water, he must be going on the water, it didn't make any sense.
As we would say, once you do the math. And I took a lot of phone calls from Canadian television and radio stations who were keenly aware that Maine is right near Canada. Mm-hmm. And should the communities around there be afraid that he could drive? How many miles is it if you're in a car?
It would have taken him probably at least 4 hours. Yeah.
Right. So he could have popped in a car and gone north if he wanted into Canada. And that's why those calls came in from Canadian media to me saying, hey, what should we be looking for or worrying about? Because remember, 48 hours plus, they didn't know where he was. So 4 hours, and the shooting occurs at night. He could have been in Canada in the morning. Law enforcement, I know, did go out there to dredge the river, to check and see if he might have been there. They sent divers in case he had gone in and, killed himself at the river. But the location, so I know we got you to the river, but I had not recalled about the idea that he probably was there to visit his previous employer.
Nobody discusses it.
How far from the boat dock did he have to go to get to this other location? And the other location is what kind of shop was that?
It was a metal recycling plant where I used to work. He worked there for close to 2 years, and then he had quit / been fired in April of 2023.
So April, this shooting occurs in
October.
So April of 23 to October of 23. Seeing a pattern here, Sarah. And this shop where he worked has, as part of its business, a number of containers, the kind that you see on the back of container trucks. When they import things, they come in on big containers that get put on semis. These huge containers that are sitting around the property as part of the business, and some are active and some are inactive.
Yeah, he used to drive those, so he knew exactly where he was going.
How far from the boat launch to, say, where the property is for the business?
It's 1.1 mile.
Right.
At night, nobody would have seen him at all. He would have crossed over a major road, but after that, he was in darkness, and he would have been invisible to anybody.
And so he traveled to that property and presumably was there within the hour.
If he was running, he would have been there faster. He had another rifle. He had an AR-15 with 200 rounds of ammunition, and he had a handgun.
He shoots location, goes to the river, walks to the facility. At some point, he walks to this facility where he used to work. And I think it's very logical. You said it's a guess, but it's very logical to think that if he was at this facility where he used to work, he's there in the morning. The idea that the crew is going to come in the next morning and he's going to be able to kill a bunch of people more at his place of employment. And then the city's in lockdown. And because the city's in lockdown, the shop doesn't open. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, the shop doesn't open either.
Right.
The challenge about that, right, is that then now he's like, okay, now what do I do? And this is where we see people, their plans kind of disappear because they have a plan, but they don't have a plan after we've talked about this, right, Sarah? After they shoot and then like, okay, now what do I do? Yeah. And so that's clearly, kind of a little bit of what I see here.
Yeah, I mean, there were 3 different searches of that facility, but, one hand wasn't talking to the other, so there wasn't a thorough search of the facility. And he could have killed the police at any time. I think he was in a trailer, fully armed, and they were all around. It's not a big parking lot. He would have heard their voices, and so he could have done that.
Yeah, he wouldn't have had the control. Now, October, which is what I was just checking out, the 25th is when this occurred, was a Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
So Thursday morning, the employees don't show up. Friday morning, the employees don't show up. He's lost control of his master plan, right?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. He's lost control of his master plan at that point. And you mentioned the police had gone there. So, Robert, let's step into the world of what did the police and the community know?
Law enforcement was everywhere. By this time, the FBI had 200 people on the ground. There were ATF, local law enforcement, state troopers, helicopters, etc. I don't think he was wandering around the neighborhood just biding his time. So
no, and I'll push this out there just ahead of time about mistakes made or not mistakes made, or people assume they're mistakes. Law enforcement, was at that facility and did not search all those containers at that time. But they absolutely were at the facility, looked for him in that area a mile within. Now it's a mile of trees and more trees. So they're cautiously looking through the woods for somebody who they knows how to use a gun. Robert, could you just a little bit of his background in terms of why they were concerned because of his skill sets?
Yeah, his Army Reserve unit in Maine went every summer to West Point, 2 weeks every summer for their annual training, and trained the cadets on small arms, grenade throwing, machine guns, automatic rifles. So he had done that for 8 to 9 years prior and would have been very proficient with weapons.
And I think everybody they interviewed, even as it was ongoing, said this guy knows his stuff. I mean, he's a very skilled hunter, and he understands how to use the weapon. So that makes you imagine, as a law enforcement officer looking through the woods for somebody who can pick you up on a scope and you won't even see him.
Oh, yeah.
It's a tough job.
Yeah, tough job. Definitely. Yeah. By no means am I bashing law enforcement. Full respect to the difficulty of the job. There was in a police affidavit I found for a warrant search early on that the brother of the shooter and his best friend, both of whom were the last ones to have any contact with him, they told him that, he's on his way to Maine Recycling because he hates those employees, and he has a lot of animosity because he thinks that everybody was calling him a pedophile. Origin of the story that he thinks everybody was calling him a pedophile started in that location with those people, and that's where they think he was going next. And he had a plan, and he was going to execute the plan. So he went from the boat launch down the path to the Maine Recycling facility. He hid in a trailer.
Take care of the people who started these rumors about him being a pedophile.
They don't have any idea where he was in those 46 hours, but it's not hard to connect the dots. He intended to go there for a purpose. He had another weapon with 200 rounds of ammunition with him. So, yeah.
When police found him, he was found inside one of the containers.
Exactly.
Self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was dead. Law enforcement did not search all those containers. I worked a kidnapping once where the victim told us she heard law enforcement outside the place where she was being held, but she couldn't say anything right at the time. So, law enforcement can be walking right on top of what they're looking for, and it's possible that they don't know. But why they didn't search the containers at any given time, is kind of a question. And they went back and searched that's where they found him, right? So even if he had survived all that time, did they clock a time of death on him?
Yeah, they're not really sure because of the environment. I think they speculated 8 to 12 hours, so it would have fit the timeline that the morning shift when they come in on Friday, and then they found him at 8 o'clock at night. So
right. So just to frame this up, police had been to that location.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the affidavits indicates that the police were told, hey, this is his next target. Watch out.
Yeah.
He's going to go over to this place where he used to work because he hates those people who work there.
Mm-hmm.
But the shooter had worked at this location, had ended up leaving under, whatever bad circumstances. And his family knew that he was angry with the people. Now, at the time, he wasn't living by himself, was he? He was living on the property. Can you explain the property that was searched?
He was living about 15 miles away in a trailer in the woods. And by that time, he had shut off his family and friends. It started probably 16 to 18 months earlier, where he started making references to people calling him a pedophile. Started with just random strangers when he was in a restaurant or at the bowling alley or somewhere else. And then eventually it morphed into his head that virtually everybody, including his family, including his own son, including, everybody around him, was referring to him as a pedophile. And we'll go back to Maine Recycling. I spoke to his best friend who worked with him at Maine Recycling, who said, yeah, there was a reference at that place to him being on the sex offender registry. And he wasn't, but somebody with the same exact name was. And it's not a common name. So that was
small
just
town rumors.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. And I found out later on, and this is certainly not to disparage Maine Recycling, but 12 of their own employees are on that same registry. So, the origin of the story started there, and then it just took off in his head. And later on, they've done an analysis of his brain. He had traumatic brain injury, they think, from his training in the Army with grenades, training West Point cadets, a lot of scarring, a lot of, pretty severe traumatic brain injury. So that, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what the factor was. And he was also having a very terrible time with his own hearing. So he was adjusting his hearing aids and shutting them off a lot, which isolated him, I think, from the world. So I think all those factors just came into play.
So pretty much, if you think about it, Sarah, from the perspective of what we know so far, he's lost his job. He's bowled at the bowling alley before. He knows a lot of the people in the community, been in and out of the military. He doesn't fit in any place. There probably isn't any place in this community, even that's a small community, that this guy feels like he's part of the community. Can you give us kind of a thumbnail of where he came from, who he was?
Yeah, he was local. He was 40 years old. He grew up in a farming community, a small town just outside of Lewiston, 10 or 15 miles. Truck driver by profession, liked to hunt, liked to fish, liked to, snowmobile and a lot of outdoor activities. Pretty regular guy. I mean, almost everybody, that I spoke to said he was pretty even keeled, and he did have an anger issue towards the end of his life. And, that started to manifest, but for the most part, seemed like a pretty well-adjusted human being a year or so prior to that.
Well, that brings us to the end of part 1 of our conversation with Robert Conlin, the author of the Lewiston Shootings, An All-American Tragedy. You can find the link to Robert's work in the show notes below. Next week, we'll continue the conversation, taking a deeper look into the legal hurdles, including Maine's yellow flag law, which was meant to help, but in this case, sadly missed the mark. And if you're eager to dive into part 2 right now, it is, as always, available on Patreon at patreon.com/stopthekilling or on Apple Podcasts. Just hit the subscribe button to access not only this episode, but also our growing ad-free catalogue of bonus episodes. It's a great way to support the show and our ongoing efforts to bring these crucial conversations to light. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in part 2. Thank you for joining us on Stop the Killing. Remember, these conversations aren't just important, they're necessary. If you're ready to dive deeper into the issues we cover, Katherine's book, Stop the Killing, and also How to Talk About Guns with Anyone are available now at katherineschweit.com. Stop the Killing is proudly produced by Sarah Ferris Media. For more award-winning podcasts like Conning the Con and Watching Two Detectives, visit sarahferrismedia.com. As an independent podcast, we rely on your support to keep these critical discussions alive. If you value our work, please consider supporting us on patreon.com/stopthekilling or by simply subscribing on Apple Podcasts now. Not only will you help us to continue this mission, but you'll also get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive content that takes a deeper look into unfolding incidents. And don't forget, Stop the Killing is a team effort. You can make a difference by leaving a review on Apple and sharing this podcast with others. Together, we can keep pushing these conversations forward. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay safe, stay informed, and let's continue to stop the killing.